Well, hello. We're happy to be here today at Hiring for Good podcast. We're very fortunate to be recording our interview this morning with Gary Mortensen, president of Stoller Wine Group. Gary brings with him a wealth of experience across multiple industries, and thank you so much for being here, Gary.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, we're thrilled to have you and really, really looking forward to this conversation. I almost don't know where to start. Reading your background was so fascinating, and integrating those stories into all that you've accomplished at Stoller is going to be incredible. So I guess we'll start with why don't you give our audience an overview of kind of your journey and how you came to this point? And I know there's a lot, so feel free to just dive in.
Okay, I'll just jump in. I'm from California, believe it or not. Was born in Lompoc, California, where my dad was the chief of police. So I think they always planned to stay in Southern California, but as the chief of police, he started getting a lot of death threats.
Oh, jeez.
So he moved the family out of
Okay.
out of California, and we lived in Lake Tahoe, which was the greatest, to this date, the greatest winter I've ever experienced, especially to be an 8-year-old kid living there. Then from there, we moved to McMinnville here in Yamhill County. So that was where I grew up, went to high school, the whole thing. Little did I know what was going to happen down the road in Yamhill County, becoming really the epicenter of Pinot Noir outside of Burgundy, France. But at the time, I grew up, went to high school, didn't know what I wanted to do, so went to Oregon State for a couple of years, and I worked at Payless Drugstore. And those of you who have been in Oregon for a long time know Payless Drugstores, not the shoes, but the drugstore. And I actually worked my way up and started doing merger and acquisition work with them while I was in high school, or while I was in college, excuse me. And that was really cool. So I took some time off from college and started getting into that, and was able to really learn the first taste of something exciting around going and buying things and being part of a merger and an acquisition. So I learned that early on, and then all of a sudden, Payless sold. And at the time, they sold to Kmart and ultimately to Rite Aid. And I didn't want to do that. That didn't seem very much fun. So I took some time, went to Australia, hung out for 6 months, came back, finished college, got a degree and majored in political science and minored in history. But history has always been a sort of a North Star for me. And as I tell my journey, I guess I'll continue to thread that through. And I was one of those boomers that grew up, in love with World War II and all the movies and all the TV shows and all the comic books and everything else, and it sort of just stuck with me. I think it picked me more than I picked it, but the strategy and the tactics of warfare was something that just was interesting to me, and so I've always sort of applied that to how I think. But I came back and finished my degree and didn't know what I wanted to do. And then I was told that there was this winery in Dayton and Dundee area that was looking for someone to come and help. And so I went up there and met with them, and they said, well, yeah, why don't you come and join us? And it was Sokoblasser. And that was the days when the Oregon wine industry really hadn't really taken off. They'd done some tremendous things around 1983 and 1985. They'd won some tremendous international competitions. And so it was starting to really become, a big deal in Oregon, but it wasn't yet a big deal. And so Sokoblasser, like many Oregon wineries at the time, were very small family-owned businesses. And so when I joined them, it was really fun because I didn't know it at the time, but it was my first entrepreneurial experience. And Susan Sokoblasser was just becoming the president. She, before that, was doing teaching and other things, and Bill Blosser was the president at the time, and they made that transition. They asked me to be their vice president, and it was Wild West back in those days, because what people were drinking back in those days was things, Gallo and, the most part, or sweet wines and things like that. So Pinot Noir was here. It was going to be proven that it was the right thing to do, but at that time it was still a little bit of a harder sell. And so that was my first experience into wine. I didn't really even like wine when I started. I didn't know anything about wine, but that's kind of a theme for me, is I don't know anything about something, so I guess I'll just go do it. And it was really fun to go on that adventure with Susan as we, those early days, it was a lot of things around, should we buy some new barrels or should we make payroll? Should we fix the press or should we? So, and because it was an unproven industry still. But quickly what we started to do was looking at things like labeling and packaging and really understanding what the need of the consumer was. And that was my favorite thing, was to really look at what people wanted and trying to deliver it to them in ways that that made it easy to sell, but also would help to build up momentum for your brand. So I spent a lot of time in the tasting room watching and listening to people and how they purchased and what they thought. And, they would come in and say, I'd love to have some of your Pinot Noir. And say, great. And instead of shaming them, allow them to really feel like, so it sounds like you're really somebody that knows how to, knows what they want on a Pinot Noir, and let us help you. And so those kinds of little psychological experiments started to help me formulate brand and marketing and identity and things like that were really important. We were selling at the time a lot of Müller-Thurgau. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that. The German word is sort of version of that is Liefemilch, and it was think of Riesling and kind of a form of Riesling, sweet, and and back then in the 90s, this is way before the movie Sideways came out. So there was a small group of Pinot Noir lovers, and then there was a lot of people that just liked something sweet and quaffable, and so. But we knew that for us to evolve as a brand, we wanted to get beyond the idea of that, and so. I think that my first product innovation that really I'm proud of was we launched a sort of this challenge of what would we make if we didn't make Müller-Thurgau, because Müller-Thurgau was sort of like, not to be snobbish, but it's not, it doesn't rise up in the pantheon of Oregon wine.
Right.
So what are we going to do? And so we decided that we would try a white blend, and so. One day I was at a party, and it was a cinematographer, and we were sitting and I was watching people come in, and every single time they came in, he was known to be a big wine guy, and so everybody that would come to the door, they would knock on the door, and he would open the door, and they would present a bottle of wine that you could tell that they'd put some time and effort into, and they would present the bottle to him as like this kabuki theater. Yeah. And they would present the wine, and then he would, oh my gosh, this is, and then they would be relieved. And I'm watching this over and over again, and I'm thinking, this is really fascinating, because these people are they want to know that they've made an okay decision. And so I thought, what we should do is just blow that up. Why don't we just blow that whole idea up? And why don't we create a revolution? And I started thinking about Studio 54 in the 70s, and those lines around a block, and all the people that wanted to get into the disco at Studio 54 in New York, and then like you guys show up, they park the little thing, and you guys get in, and then it goes right back. So I thought, why don't we make a wine so cool that you just hold it up and you get into anywhere, right? They don't have to worry about anything. This guy's going to see they got that, he knows they're in. They don't have to worry. So I thought, we need to have a revolution. So the next morning I called up our winemaker and said, how many white wines are you planning to put into this blend? He goes, I don't know, 7. I said, okay, what can you get me to 9?
Oh, shoot.
And he said, well, there's a little tiny bit of, in the test vineyard, a little tiny bit of muscat. And I said, okay, just do that. And I called up our ad agency, which is Sandstrom Design at the time, and I said, okay, I've got an idea. We need to have a revolution. And as a big Beatles fan, I said, why don't we do Revolution number 9? Uh-huh. And so the packaging started to come together, and then we got nervous about Apple Corps suing us, so we dropped the R and made it Evolution number 9. And the thing about it was that it was the right timing for something like that. It was a bit irreverent. It also took a wine that people didn't want to be seen drinking, and it was the base of it was still Müller-Thurgau.
Yeah.
But it became a much cooler wine, a cooler packaging, and it was something that hadn't been seen out of Oregon before. It was something that was completely different, and it was in a really cool. Sally Morrow was a designer, and the label that she did was a letter block 9. Just said Evolution with a big 9 on it. And then we had a little chain around the neck that said things you can do with Evolution, the Watusi, the twist, all the things from Lennon's Revolution 9. And and it had a little red kiss on the top. There's a little wax thing that you put on the top. And the packaging was a 10. And the wine was really, really delicious, and it's still delicious. But the wine writers and the public got it. They got the joke, and when they tried the wine, they realized it wasn't a joke, but it was actually really, a really well-made, intentional wine. But it was a cool product, and in a dogmatic industry where it's tradition and everything is, at that time in particular, was something that you don't color too far out of the lines at. Now it's really different now, but back then it was something. This was a kind of a lightning bolt that hit the industry, and it helped us really differentiate ourselves from the rest of the industry, and it became very quickly the number one selling white wine in Oregon.
Wow!
And it just took off after that. So that kind of innovation was something that I found really life-giving, and that was, I think, probably a little bit of a cold I caught that I still have. But I think it's about, what can you how can you see something differently that everyone else sees, and how can you make sure that you're in tune with what the public wants? And so that's something that I spent a lot of time on. We also did concerts at Sokolblosser. I don't know if you remember or went to any of those. We went big, and we brought out Tony Bennett and Ray Charles and big shows like that. And the reason for those were to brand us, to put us in a position to where you're associating Tony Bennett and Sokolblosser. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Ray Charles, Sokolblosser, not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And so those things helped us to really quickly build our market momentum up. So we went from a smaller, medium-sized winery in Oregon to getting larger, and really the reputation of the brand started to really build. And I loved it, and it was really fun to do. But I also started getting the itch that's like, okay, what's next for me? So which is, I'd done that for 11 years with Sokolblosser. So we took it from a winery where we were kind of concerned about how do we make payroll and all that to, I think, leaving it better than it was found. And I loved my working with Susan. She's absolutely the best. But I needed something more. So my itch was, what else can I do? And you meet a lot of people when you're in the wine industry. And I met a gentleman by the name of Pat Cox, who I can say is not only I consider him a brother, but my mentor. And Pat had just taken a company called Metro One public, and he's got a whole bunch of patents on the wall. And Pat's a fascinating individual, and I got to worship at the altar of Pat a little bit about learning about entrepreneurism, and Pat is just his approach to the world is fascinating. And so I met him, and I said, I'm kind of thinking about, maybe I'm done with the wine industry. I want a new challenge. And he said, well, I'm thinking about starting a new company, and if you're interested. So I said, yeah. So I met with him, and Metro One was if you dial 411 on your phone, and they had all the back end to that. So they had deals with all the telcos, and so when you dialed 411 to get information, that's who they were. And so they very successfully took that public, and then they were done with that. And Pat left and wanted to go do something then, but they had a non-compete, and so there had to be some time in between that. So Pat didn't want to wait around, so he started this company called Cusant. And there was a lot of possible wine-fueled ideation times at his house in between the formation of that and its launching. But he said, I've got this idea that it's kind of like not really what my expertise is, but why don't you come join, be employee number one, and why don't you help me, why don't you just take this on? It's like, okay, what is it? And he goes, well, I think, and now this is 1999. Let me preface this.
Yes, right.
Yes, I remember 1999.
He goes, I think there's a way where you can get a taxi a different way than you do right now. He goes, I think you can do it a different way with your phone. And so it's like, interesting. And so we started talking more and more about that. And so the next thing you know, IQ Taxi is born. And I was realizing that what Pat gave me was a great big blank canvas with a whole bunch of paint on it, and say, go create something, which was just sort of like the most exhilarating possible thing. And so what we did was we built an engineering team, a sales team, project management team around this thing, and started to go out. And I remember driving up, before any of that happened, I drove up to Seattle with this idea, and I met with it's a black car service. They had a black car limousine. And then I also met with one of the taxi companies up there and talked to them about this idea, and also talked to Radio Cab here in Portland and said, imagine this, if the internet and your phone, you can somehow get it. And they're like, we're in.
Yeah.
So started signing all these guys up to these 3-year exclusive agreements for the internet and the phone, and it's like wireless. And it's like, wow, this is pretty cool. So within about 2 years, we'd had the top 125 markets locked in. We had the back-end technology built out. And then Pat, using his connections, you remember the old flip phones where you had in the top?
Yeah, you had the little buttons.
And there was a little top 5 services in your phone, like
Yeah.
the top. IQ Taxi was in all of those.
Wow.
And it was really fascinating.
Because he had the telecom connection.
He had the telecom
Yeah.
connection.
Okay.
So we had everything we needed. And it was really fascinating dealing with the taxi industry, because there was taxi industries in early 2000s that still had switchboards.
Oh my gosh.
And they had like phone systems that were still dial, pick up everything was, and it varied from taxi to industry, taxi business to taxi business, or region to region. And then you're also dealing with some interesting, colorful groups within the taxi industry, and and so it was all very interesting. And the problem that the taxi industry had was that they were legacy based. Mm-hmm. The problem that we had was that we were ahead of the technology. So, the problem that ultimately sunk IQ Taxi, and failure will be something I'll be talking a lot about, was you couldn't have the location-based services yet. I mean, that was 5-6 years away. Sure. So, and we couldn't tell exactly where someone was to send the cab. But I remember having the International Taxi and Livery Association, the ITLA, I remember having these many, many conversations about, it feels like you guys need to evolve pretty quickly with your business, and we want to be your partners in that. And they intuitively said yes, most of them, but they also said, but only by our rules. And so that's really what we found, was that, what Uber should have been owned by the taxi industry.
They missed it.
And they missed it. And the reason why was because they thought nothing could ever happen to us. We're too big to fail. We're too ingrained to fail. Mm-hmm. A taxi medallion in 2013, the height of a taxi medallion was in 2013. It was $1 million for a medallion in New York City. Wow. And now it's about $25,000.
Jeez.
Because the industry was completely disintermediated by technology. When Uber came along and just said, we're not, if you're not going to work with us, we're going to work around you. And boy, did they ever. And, it was such a highly regulated, taxis are so highly regulated, and yet the Uber guys, and then ultimately Lyft and everyone else went around them, went around the regulations, and just started pushing. And the next thing you know, these families and these individuals that have invested so much into their own taxi businesses, it's a shell of itself. Yeah. And it was a cautionary tale for me to watch this. And Pat, in his great vision and wisdom, knew that non-competes were up. This was probably not going to land the plane in time. And then 9/11 came, which was also life-changing. So all these things converged at once. And so as part of that, I was asked to go and abandon the taxi piece, which was hard because it was a failure. And that was my first, what I would consider in my professional career, something that didn't work. But then I was asked to go spend 3 out of 4 weeks for a long time in Washington, D.C. and get to know the intelligence community pretty well, because our main business now was activated, and we were using data sets for things like accessing our phone data records to help validate a loan, things like that. So it's called IQ 411. What was cool about it, though, was that those same data sets were starting to become very, very useful in extreme risk mitigation scenarios. So right after 9/11, the Patriot Act and all these things started coming in. And, it was so funny because the privacy groups were so much more relevant back then. I mean, our privacy is just like free here, take a bucket full of it. But back then, the privacy groups, so we were doing things like CAPS 2, which was computer-assisted pre-passenger screening, which were things that were the kind of all this
All
TSA
the
pre-check
data
now,
off of
right?
off
But
of
back
the
then,
phone.
as the
Yeah.
privacy groups were going, no. So we were involved in all of that as well. And it was really fascinating to spend time in D.C. and to feel that sort of patriotism and people wanting to make sure that, we were safe. And the D.C. sniper, when, Charles Moose
That was probably right at that time, huh?
It was, and I spent all 3 weeks there.
Oh
And,
my gosh! Oh,
but our data sets were being used to help, again,
Oh, wow.
in an indirect way. But our data sets were never the lead product, but they always fit into many, many things. So relational databases, things like that.
so I'm just gonna pop in, like in these two companies that you've talked about where you were a founder. One, your technology timing is so prevalent in both parts of both of these stories. Because one, you were a little too early, and then with this one, it sounds like you were just right on, like perfect timing for them really being able to utilize.
Yeah, and I think the other theme is, I've never done that before. So, never did M&A before. I didn't go to school for it. Didn't go to school for wine. Had no clue about that. Had no clue about the tax industry. No clue about the intelligence community or anything like that. And just got to go and do those things. And I think it's just, sort of not being afraid to jump in. And it really comes down to what's thematic about all those is just relationships.
Yeah.
And are you able to connect with people? And one of the first things I did was when I got to DC was started working with LexisNexis because they had all the GSA contracts into everybody, and so we just became a partner with them. But I said, hey, I'd love to get to know a bunch of the CIA folks. I'd love to throw a winemaker dinner and have them all come. So we had we rented out a place in Maryland and had a bunch of the agents and
Oh my gosh.
and the analyst mice mostly came, and I got some Sokolblosser wine through a Sokolblosser party.
You're like,
and
you knew how to do
I'm
this.
the most popular guy.
Yes.
Exactly.
And it's really funny because one side story is the CIA. We'd go to Langley all the time, and we worked with the librarians. So yes, there are such things as CIA librarians, and we'd go there and work with them, and they were really very stoic, and so. But I got to be an agent my own way because I found out what their tell was. And these two women who I was dealing with, they were always polite, but they were like, I find out they're big U2 fans.
Oh.
And so we start talking U2, and then next thing you know, I'm sending them bootleg U2 tapes from concerts and stuff. And then finally, one of them says, fourth meeting, and oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here. I want to show you something. So we're in the basement of the CIA headquarters, which is, I don't even know what floor that is.
Right.
And they've got this giant map table out, and she goes and gets this big satellite thing that they put on this lighted map table, and she says, "Look, okay, so this is Ireland." And here we go.
God,
and she goes, "So
CIA is tracking you too.
And she said, "Now look, she goes, here's this little house. See this house? Well, that road, there's Bono's house. But this house right here, nobody owns it, so we're going to buy it." And I'm like,
Oh my God.
so satellite stalking.
That is amazing.
Yeah, so that was kind of fun. But it was those kinds of things. Yeah. And so then Cusin had an exit, and it was sold to TransUnion. And I did some consulting for a while. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I love the idea of data aggregation, and that was sort of what I was learning. And I learned so many lessons from Pat, just around owner versus renter, and don't let best get in the way of better, and we're in the possibility business, and all of these kinds of things that just stuck. They were things that, okay, those all make complete sense to me. And so then I did a little consulting, and then this itch that I needed to scratch around World War II kept coming back, and I thought, well, why don't we build a database that aggregates all the World War II veteran stories into a free database that anybody can contribute to or access. And so I started working on that. And at the same time, I met a couple of guys that were starting a mobile wallet company. And so I started doing those two things kind of simultaneously. But with the veterans thing, it started, and as I started, the word was getting out, I was looking to do this, I started getting more hard drives and little things sent to me, not from World War II, but from Iraq and from Afghanistan.
Wow.
And I was looking at these things, and it's like, holy cow, this there just wasn't anything like that existed from an individual's perspective from World War II. Mm-hmm. So, but here you're getting to see, and what was most striking was there were a lot of young guys, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids out in war. And these are the Oregon National Guard that really I started getting a lot from. And I'd started a little organization, and it was Scott Laney was the guy that basically founded Veterans Legacies, and we called it back then the National Combat History Archive. And so we were doing this, and the idea was, why don't we make a documentary film? And of course, never done that before.
Right.
So, well, okay, well, let's do that. So I found 9 Oregon National Guards, 8 men and 1 woman, and interviewed them, brought them into a studio, not unlike here, sat them down and just had them talk, just asked them questions. Again, it's the human condition. I wanted to learn. And it was life-changing, absolutely life-changing. So 9 months later, the film This Is War, Memories of Iraq came out, and it was really fascinating. And the gist of it is that we ended it in a bunch of film festivals. It won a bunch of film festivals, and I got a call from the Veterans Administration, and they said, "We've seen your film, and we'd like to make it our official training film for family members and for for our staff, because it's so real." And it was like, holy cow! And then we did a 20-city in Oregon tour where we got movie theaters to make it free. Mm-hmm. They donated the time, and what was so powerful about all of this was we'd show the film, which was one thing, but then at the end of the film, many of the guys that were in the film would come up on stage, and they would, and it was wow. It was powerful. And we went down. Frank Dulcich from Pacific Seafoods lent his jet, and we were able to fly many of them down to Los Angeles for a film festival that we won there, Suzanne de Laurentiis' film festival, Cinema City. And they ended up at Ed McMahon's house.
Oh my gosh.
Hanging out with Ed McMahon. Yeah. And they're in their dress blues, and they stole the whole festival because they looked so good. And the film was recognized for achievement in documentary filmmaking, and it was really cool. But the thing was that what hit me the hardest about all this was that we suck as a nation in reintegrating our mm-hmm. folks back. Yeah. And so hearing their stories of not only their own personal stories, but of many of their friends about what it means to be in asymmetrical warfare, meaning you don't know when, World War II, the Germans were over there. In asymmetrical warfare, they're amongst us, and you never know. I mean, when someone's going to come out and go boo, or if that bag is going to explode mm-hmm. on the side of the road. And so we're just completely ill-equipped to deal with that as a society. And I think that, with things winding down now, it's I'm hopeful that we've learned a lot as a nation on how to take care of our veterans. And then a year later, one of the sergeants from the first film said, "Love it if you would make a story about Afghanistan, because no one's telling their story." And so I met with a couple of the guys there, and they said, they told me that this little 16-man all-volunteer unit deployed to Helmand Province, and Helmand Province is like, in Afghanistan. They had deployed there, and they came back as the most decorated unit in Oregon National Guard history. And so their story is tremendous, and so I was able to tell that story as well. Shepherds of Helmand was the name I came up with, but I got to know these guys, and I really focused on 6 of them. I kept it a little bit more small and tight, and all these guys are just like, I love all of them. As they're just amazing people, and the most humbling part about all of this was several of them came and said the film gave them the permission to talk, and a couple of them said it probably saved their lives.
Yeah.
Right. And so those are the kind of things where it's like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
So I'm, and I think in the pantheon of any of the things I've ever done in my life, those will stand as probably the things that matter the most to me, because I've seen the impact. Mm-hmm. And storytelling is everything. And it's kind of like winemaking. It's like to make a great wine, you got to start with great fruit, and then just get the hell out of the way. Mm-hmm. Do as little manipulation as possible, but make sure you've got great fruit, and make sure you've got great stories. And these are all really powerful stories. And then, my job was just to knit it together and try to make some sense.
Well, and I think it helps that you had such a passion for it too, that, obviously you care. And that is always, people see it, they feel it. And when somebody cares, then it allows them to open up more.
I agree. And, part of my journey was understanding my father. So my policeman father was always we'll call it a hair trigger temper, and was angry a lot. And what I came to realize was that my dad had survivor's guilt. And it was through working with them, so it was as therapeutic for me as it was for them, because my dad's unit, he was a military combat policeman and during the Korean War, and he was held off the plane that ultimately flew off because he was a hell of a baseball player, and he was actually drafted by the Yankees. But he ended up, his unit, they took, I think, 3 or 4 guys off the battalion, and the rest flew up. They flew to Tokyo, then they flew to Seoul, and then they trucked them up to the front lines. And this is right when the Chinese had attacked across the Yalu River by the million. And they retired the colors the next day. So he lost all of his friends.
Oh, my gosh.
And so he never played baseball again. And so all these things, but he lived with that. And he never, back in those days, you weren't given the permission to tell your story.
Absolutely.
To deal with that. And so it manifests, it always manifests, right? And so that allowed me to understand my dad by listening to many of these guys who, some still won't tell their stories. The World War II veterans is like, they lived they had these incredible experiences, and yet rarely would they talk. Mm-hmm. And if they did talk, it was usually to someone like me who had some knowledge. So I'm proud to say that I had so many wonderful extra granddads, that I like to call them, of stories that I could go hours and hours about, each one more incredible than the next. But the one I will tell you, from the World War II piece, was Bill Seitz, who changed my life too. He was a B-24 pilot, and he was stationed out of Italy. And if you're stationed out of Italy, it means you didn't have the restriction of missions. So like in Europe or in England, it was 25, then 30. So he flew 90 missions.
Oh my God.
90?
90 missions. 90 missions. And but every time you'd see him, he'd stand up, he'd take his hat off. He had his little oxygen tank he brought behind him. He'd say, "Bill, how you doing?" He'd go, "Every day's a gift."
Oh, wow.
And I know the things that he went through, because he told me all those things. And I know that every day was a gift for him. He was, just to give you an idea, he was picking plexiglass out of his back of his skull until the day he died. So so I taught my boys that every day is a gift, right? That was the thing that I wanted to impart from Bill and have that live on. So remind my boys that every day is a gift. And so these are things that I think give you humility in life. And I think failing and learning from others and understanding where you fit in the world are humbling. And so hopefully it allows you to make a more introspective leader.
Gosh,
absolutely.
There's so much here. I mean,
I wrote down some words that I felt were really powerful, and it's about learnings and how we evolve as a person. But the words that I wrote down was failure. You talked about that. Timing. Mm-hmm. That was funny how you jumped in with timing. Mentoring, relationships, and humility. And you take those 5 things as you listen to your journey of where you are today. How do you take that and implement it as a leader in a fast-growing, evolving organization?
Yeah, it's part of it is the talent that you surround yourself with, and it also starts with who you work for. And this isn't my company. I work for someone who is absolutely a visionary and a entrepreneur and just a steward of the right, I guess. And when I say the right, I don't mean politically. I mean just doing the right thing. As I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, I got involved in a mobile wallet company, and that was right around 2008. We started doing it. We all remember 2008.
Oh yes.
And it kind of didn't. We were so close in a couple of times. It was again. He's talking about humility and failure. We were so close with a couple of things, and it ultimately just didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And so, it was hard because at that same time I had in my own personal life, I'd lost within a very few short months, I lost my mom, my dad, and my best friend.
Oh my gosh.
And so, part of me wanted to save something that I could save because I couldn't save them. And I wanted to save this startup. And it was really maybe the hardest time of my life because I had to let go of that too because I was going to run it right into the ground. I was going to just go right into the side of the mountain with it because it was just like, no. And my wife was like,
yeah,
no. And, her sort of checking me and helping me, and lovingly doing so, but still doing so, helped me pull out of that. But it was hard. I mean, we all have to grieve, and we all grieve in different ways. I'm still grieving. I mean, that's a huge loss. And to have it all hit you at once when I really hadn't experienced loss other than a grandparent or two, which is enough, but to lose that kind of core. So that all set me sort of rethinking things too about who am I, what do I want to do? And, the one constant thing was the connecting with the veterans and the World War II stories and continuing to do that, which was important to me. But I also thought, what do I want to do? Is like, what's the next big adventure? And someone had said that Bill Stoller was looking for someone to come in and, run his company. And so I met with Bill, and we had dinner and we talked, and it was like, yeah, I love Bill. He's great. But do I really want to get back in the wine industry? And so I asked him, what do you want to do? And he goes, well, I'd really like to scale it. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Okay, let me think about this. And so went out and met with him about a week, 2 weeks later, and went out and was at Stoller because we'd met offsite. And I drove out there, and it was this beautiful November day. And it was just that fall fog, and it's just the property is so gorgeous. And I met Melissa Burr, who's now been the winemaker for over 20 years. I met her, and she was amazing, and met some of the staff. And I was driving home, and I called my wife, and she goes, what do you think? And I said, I think it's an unassembled Ferrari, and I got the wrench. Is what
Right. Put it together.
And so then, and right after that, I joined. Well, actually, Bill's wife at the time had just died, and so things kind of went off track for a little bit. And so I joined the company in March of 2012, and as I was standing there, I think the first day, and Bill and I are standing out there, and we're looking west. And there's always these spectacular sunsets, and Bill will always say little things that are somewhat Zenish, and he was looking west, and we're both looking. They're not really saying anything, and he goes, I want to build businesses that last at least 200 years, and that caused my head to explode.
Yeah.
And coming from the startup culture and all of that, and there was something really like being wrapped in a warm blanket about that, but also feeling a tremendous amount of responsibility around that. To have that kind of vision and that sort of wherewithal to know that this is going to survive all of us, and that the goal is to keep it going, I felt like, okay, this feels like this is for me. And at the time in 2011, so the vintage before, because I hadn't experienced the vintage yet, we'd made 9,100 cases of wine, and so. That was sort of the beginning. And we had, I think, a staff of 13.
And so share with us where you are today.
We have 175 employees, and we made 260,000 cases of wine.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And, and some of the people that I got there at first, I think that one of the lessons I've learned is you can't save everybody. You've got an owner versus renter, right? And that mentality, don't let best get in the way of better sometimes. So some of these folks were happy with a sleepy little winery, and I represented like some danger.
The new
Who's this guy?
paradigm is coming in.
But I'll give you an example. And we were talking about earlier about hiring people, and I'm never a big believer in dogmatic thinking, and I don't believe that necessarily just because you've done something before it means that you're the most qualified to do it. And early on, I would call up Bill and I'm saying I'm going to do this or do this, and he's what? And one of those early on was I said, it's time for us to hire business development. And let me tell you, that's obviously in tech, that's like, of course.
Yeah.
In the wine industry, it's like, what? What's that do?
Right.
And so I said, I've got a guy, I want to hire him. And his name's James Falvey. And James was recommended to me, and James was 10 years head of season ticket sales for the Portland Trail Blazers. And so we're walking, I'm doing the bill to him now. We're walking along the vineyard there, and I said, "What do you know about wine?" He goes, "I don't know anything about wine." He goes, "I like whiskey." And I said, "Great, you're hired." Because what he knew was people.
Yes.
And James is very quickly, if Stoller is out there and somewhat ubiquitous, especially in the business community, he gets a lot of that credit. So it's really, the great honor for me has been to build a team. And I'm proud to say that we have as many women in management, senior management, as we do men. And, I love finding those people that have the natural curiosity to want to be part of an adventure.
So is that the pivotal quality you look for when building teams? Is it just, what are the qualities that are going to synergize with the culture you've built?
Absolutely, curiosity is one of the top ones. But being a good collaborator, someone that also has the humility to not build silos or to be, put themselves. I like to say that it's got to be brand before product. It's got to be person, company before the individual, and we've got to understand that we're all in this grand adventure together, and they got to also want to make it fun. This has got to be fun. We're not curing cancer.
Yeah.
We're also in a luxury business, and in wine, we can all go, as hard as that is to imagine, we could probably go our entire lives without drinking wine and be okay.
I'm sorry. I don't think I heard that correctly.
Right? I mean, it seems like that's just crazy thinking, but I have the perspective that they can. And so we have to work very, very hard to make sure that we're building brands that people identify with. And that, in terms of hiring, I like to say, this should be the hardest job to get and the most painful job to leave. I think that as we started to scale the company and so we started to add those key people, it was trial and error, and not everybody's stuck, but we kept evolving the organization. And there's really two halves of the story. There's the 2012 to 2019, and then there's 2020 and on.
Yeah.
And you can look at the hockey stick that was from 2012 to 2019. And the thing is that I was sort of reminiscing about this. Some of the things that were really big deals back then were like screw caps.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and the industry was all up in arms around purity laws and conjunctive labeling, and there's a lot of division within that about whether or not it should be 100% Pinot Noir or 95%. These were things that people were up at night, just like, oh my gosh, those were the things.
Wow.
2020 comes along, and that's when things get really crazy. And I think that that's what defined us. When the pandemic happened, many of the wineries decided that they were going to lay people off, and so they could get benefits and things like that. Every February, we have our retreat. And in February of 2020, we were very, very proud of ourselves because we'd done a SWOT, and we'd put up everything you can imagine on that wall about what could go wrong, and we had an answer for it. And so if someone had come in and said that there would be no American restaurant industry for the entire year, that there would be a pandemic, that there would be a tasting rooms closed, and then at the end of it, there would be the worst smoke event in the history of our industry, we would have taken that person out and had them drug tested. It's like, come on, let's be reasonable here. But that's exactly what happened. And we had a very ambitious budget set for ourselves for that year, which was based on the continuum and the sort of
trajectory.
Yeah, the trajectory of the growth that we'd already had. We were hockey sticking, and our production was growing from 12,000 cases, 14,000 cases. Then it was 20,000, then 40,000, then 80,000. So we were growing, and so it was just an extension of that. And so we were planning on producing 160,000 cases in 2020. Because of the smoke event, we produced about 80, just to give you a perspective. But that didn't change all of the things around what our ambitious plans were. And so at that same time, a lot of our peer wineries were starting to immediately lay people off once March came of 2020. And that's when it was clear there was something going on. So I pulled our entire team together and I said, no one's getting laid off. And but we are going to have to be agile. We're going to have to reimagine the business because we obviously don't know how long this is going to last. And if it lasts a week, that's awesome. But if it lasts longer, we're going to have to really imagine what it's going to take. And so I put together a little advisory council within our own team. And, I have an XCOM team and then a larger senior management team. And we just started whiteboarding and figuring out what we could do. And this I think, was us at our best because we were innovators. And this is what I've run this company like a startup since I got there. And I think this was the payoff, was that, again, the wine industry is very like the taxi industry. It's very legacy based. I mean, you plant things in the ground and then you harvest those things, and that's how it works. But innovation is not always first and foremost, especially around adapting to an extreme market event like this. And that's what we did. And we also that's when I started the program of feeding people. So to this day, we provide lunch for every one of our staff members. It became, we institutionalized it then, and it became that for us going forward. And so to this day, when you work for Stoller, you get lunch. And it's a great thing because it's communal. It also connects people. They sit down, and it's wonderful always to see different departments eating with each other. And we have a culinary team, and it's, one of the other things that Bill Stoller hates is waste, and I do too. And so, when we have a big event, our chefs are very good about, what they produce, and then if there's anything left over, people get it for lunch the next day. Not a bad thing given some of the food. So, all those things started to add to our culture amplifying, just changing though and morphing. And the expectation was come up with another idea. Let's try it. There's no bad ideas. And we also liberally looked at what other people were doing that was successful, and we adapted too. But at the end of the day, we knew that people wanted to still feel connected. So we took our tasting room staff that normally, is waiting on people, and we cannibalized those guys, and we turned them into inside callers. And I didn't ask them to sell anything to people. What I asked them to do was check in on them.
Yeah.
Just, how you doing? And I learned that from my military history because what George Patton did during his dash across France was he took all of his military policemen and he turned them into his eyes and his ears. He fired them from being military policemen, and he sent them up to the front line, had them gather information and bring it back because he'd run off the map. And I thought, well, why don't we cannibalize our staff and turn them into something else too? And that was inside callers. And we had more compliments and more comments from people that just wanted to be, because again, everybody was scared.
And loyalty.
And loyalty, right? And so it was just connecting. And so I think there's always a way out. And I think that's the message, is that we don't know. It was 2012 to 2019, and there's 2020 to now, and everything is changing, and it constantly is changing. But I think what doesn't change is relationships, connections. People want to feel like they've got a place that they can escape to, or something that makes them feel good. Those are just basic human conditions. And so if you don't get too clever about those things, you can help with that. But I've said this from the very minute I got to the winery is, what business are we in? And I got some crazy looks at the beginning because it's like, well, obviously the wine business, but it's like beyond that, we're in the sales and marketing business. I believe that we should sell wine like Nike sells shoes. We sell brand, we sell experience, we sell relationships, we sell many other things besides that. And that's really what's important. And so everybody that works there has to buy into that system. And so when you get everybody kind of rowing in the same direction, and the idea is, I believe the leadership style should always be that this is an adventure that we're on. This should be fun, and that everybody is empowered. It's a very collaborative, flat organization. I want people here that the newest person has got a path forward if they want it, and just go grab it. And so those are the things that have put us to where we are today.
I think this is an incredible journey. And we talked about this early on about how, again, wine, technology, timing, failure, all has made who you are today. But what's that one piece of advice you would have given your 20-year-old self?
Be fearless. Even younger, be fearless. There's a way out of everything. There's something to be learned from everything you do, and just do it. Do not take counsel to your fears. Just go out and plunge in. I give that advice to my boys.
I love it.
Yeah. I love it too. Wow. Very powerful. the last question we ask all of our guests is, what does hiring for good mean to you? I know we haven't talked too much about hiring, but you've given so much wisdom regarding building teams. It can mean a lot of different things. What would your interpretation be?
Well, it's really easy for me. It starts with the founder of the company, Bill Stoller, and I want to always learn from whoever I'm around, and if it's the staff or specifically someone like Bill Stoller, who we could all learn from. Trust me, he's an amazing human being. He built the world's first LEED Gold certified winery. So it's a testament to environmental design. And so when I got there, everything was about the environment. Everything was about sustainability, Salmon-Safe and LEED and Live certified and all these things that are beneficial. Mm-hmm. And so we start with that foundation, and then we went out and got B Corp certified, Benefit Corp certified. And so that's a rigorous process to go through, is to get B Corp certified. But it was easy for us because we'd already done so much of the work. But B Corp isn't just about sustainability in the environment. It's also sustainability in your workforce and sustainability in your community. Mm-hmm. And so we do a lot to support our community. And I'll give you an example is, Bill acquired the Evergreen Aviation Space Museum, and which is tremendous. And I'm on the board of that, and I got to help write the plan to convince him to do so as a historian. Mm. But also, it's the right thing to do, and it's a tremendous asset. But we also do much to support our community in philanthropic ways that around education, around issues of poverty and hunger, because it's the right thing to do. And then nothing makes Bill or I happier than having generational families, and I'm one of those guys because I've got my son working there, and that's one of the things that I didn't even talk about. But during that pandemic, is we went to visual storytelling, and we have an in-house visual storytelling team because nothing brings the power of that place home better than watching it or seeing it.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of things are all really powerful. So I don't think that you can look at one leg of a stool when it comes to that, about what that means. I think it means that you've got a robust view of where you fit in everything. And I think my responsibility to the staff is I have to be consistent and I have to be transparent. And I also have to come every day with my A game. Yeah, and if I don't, I expect somebody to come and take me out and replace me.
Wow. Well, I'm just filled with gratitude. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Gary, absolutely. And what a bunch of learnings that I've learned today. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you both.
Yeah, truly a pleasure. Thanks for joining us today at Hiring for Good. If you were inspired by our conversation, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you want to learn more about our executive search services, check us out at www.hiringforgood.net or our company website, Acumen Executive Search.
Thanks so much, and don't forget to join us next time for another in-depth conversation about transformational leadership. Until then, have fun.